Hey guys, so I've been getting some questions about Honda gear ratios, and I made a video with this chart a while back, and I wanted to revisit some things. People always ask when they want a gear reduction or whatever tires. The most common question I get is, what gear reduction should I run with what tires? And a lot of people argue with me and say that I recommend gear reductions that are too small. Why don't you just put a 69% in everything? That way anyone can always turn their tires. Well, that's because every time someone does that to one of their bikes, they bring it back to me and ask me to put a 40% in it. Or they get rid of the machine because it's not fun to ride anymore. So I'm going to try to explain why that is with numbers. So this chart's confusing. There's a lot of different colors going on. This is back when I was looking at getting a double clutch Rubicon instead of the normal foot shift because it has twice as many gears. So you have high and low range. So I was analyzing the gear splits to try to see, what's the difference? Is it worth getting? What would it really get me? Making some plots. Basically, I decided it wasn't worth the extra complexity of the engine and the extra upkeep because even though you are getting a lot more gears, you're not getting that much wider of a ratio overall. High and low needs to be a bigger difference on the Rubicon for me to consider it. But I'm not going to go through this chart. I know this chart's kind of confusing. I made a simplified version of what we want to talk about over here. So let me zoom in on this so everyone can see it. This is not the right sheet. Where did it go? Ah, here we go. Okay, so this is pretty simple. So 500 fuel injected ratios, they're all the same for the Rubicons, Foremans, etc. Here's your first gear, teeth count, and then your ratios. So these are the only ones that really matter. These are the ratios. So you can see that they're really different. Honda always does this. There's a huge jump between first and second gear. That's the same as any low horsepower ATV. The only way to get you to be able to turn the tires in thick mud is to give you a really low first gear ratio. So Honda used to call first gear super low. It used to be stamped on the case, SL. The old three wheelers and some of the old 300s had it. And super low meaning a 77% difference from second to first gear. So if you want to make your four wheeler pull second gear like it used to pull first gear, basically turn your first gear into an ultra low tractor gear and turn your second gear into what your first gear was before, you need a 77% reduction. That sounds all fine and dandy, right? I'll have a super low gear for creeping, and then I'll have my first gear for going a little faster through mud and water. Well, the problem is with most mud tires, your Honda couldn't turn them in first gear anyways. So you really need to go lower than that, right? Because you're going to put a heavier tire that's a bigger diameter and all that. But let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, we're going to put a 77% reduction, which doesn't exactly exist. Most people do a 60%, but just keep it simple. Let's say a 77%. Take that as an assumption. Okay, so we're going to put a 77% reduction to make your first gear super low and your second gear to what your first gear used to be. Well, once we account for tires, right, stock's 25s, most people run about a 30, just it's the most common, so we're doing that assumption. That's a 20% increase in tire size. So your gear reduction is an underdrive, and this is an overdrive. So when you multiply these two numbers together, right, your underdrive and your overdrive, you get a new ratio, which is about 48%. So let's just call it a 50%. So once you account for the diameter of your tires, right, that's what diameter is same uh, ratio of circumference, which relates to speed, you're turning 48 more RPMs in the same gear at the same miles per hour. So what does that mean for fifth gear? Well, if your top speed was 45, you multiply that, or you divide 45 by 1.5 essentially. Now your top speed is 30 miles per hour. That might not sound too bad to some people. Only going 30 miles an hour in a Honda, suspension's not that great. What's the big deal? I can live with that. Well, the problem is this is 30 miles an hour at the rev limiter. And if you're driving with anyone who doesn't have a huge gear reduction, you're going to be sitting there listening to this all day. Wop, 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 trying to keep up with literally anything. It's not comfortable for covering long distances. So, if all you do is go to the mud park, unload your four-wheeler, drive 12 feet, and you're in the first mud hole, and you stay there all day, a top speed of 30 miles per hour is fine. But if you go to Holopau, where you're trying to go from North Beach to South Beach, to the parking lot, to the Gator Loop, to the Brick Lake Trail, etc., everyone you're riding with is going to hate you because you're going to be cruising realistically at 20 miles an hour because that's where it's going to be comfortable and not super high in the RPMs. Another issue with gearing your bike too low is your first gear becomes so low that you don't have enough wheel speed to do a water wheelie, really, because it's just, runs out of speed so fast. You get through rev limiter so quick, you can't really walk out a water wheelie, and also you can't clean out the tires very well. So then you shift to your second gear thinking, oh, my second gear, it's pretty low now, I can spin them in second gear. Sorry, but most Hondas cannot spin 4 aggressive mud tires very well in what is a stock first gear ratio. So you shift to second gear and you don't have enough torque. It bogs really bad, especially when you're in some deep stuff or some thick stuff. So because of this huge gap between first and second gear, you end up in this weird situation with a Honda where you're either running out of wheel speed in first gear or you shift to second gear and it falls flat on its face and bogs. And that is the reason people buy Can-Ams, because they have enough horsepower that they never bog. They can just rip the tires loose, aerate the water, and go. Now, the real solution to this whole problem is to not run stupid tires on your four-wheeler. If you run a reasonable mud tire like a Zilla or a Tarachi Aztec or a Mayhem, things that don't have a huge amount of side lug, you can usually run second gear with a smallish gear reduction. And also your bike's faster. The problem with those tires are none of them look that cool. And yes, you do get some more performance if you have a giant cleat like an Assassinator or a Mamba or a Silverback. What do you call them? The MT2, I think. The big bad Silverbacks, or like it's the Outlaw 2s with the big sidewall wrap, the heavy Outlaw 3s. Yes, all those tires look better, and you do get a little bit more mudding performance. But the reason you don't see them on my four-wheelers ever is because you sacrifice so much rideability. Because in order to turn them properly, you've got to put one of these monster gear reductions. You give up your top speed, you give up your wheel speed, you can't pop the wheels off the ground anymore. It's just not as fun. So this is what I don't really recommend big gear reductions. I will install them for people. It's the same amount of labor for me to install a big one or a small one, and I also make the same money on the gear reduction. I've just, more often than not, I've taken out big gear reductions to put in small ones for people than the other way around. The only time I recommend a big gear reduction is on a Rancher 420, because Rancher 420s are geared higher than this. They have a higher first gear and a higher secondary reduction. So on a 420, the smallest I'll ever install is a 40%. If you want to run like a 32, aggressive 32, I recommend a 60%. But on a 500, I don't know, I can't remember the last time I've actually installed anything bigger than a 40. Because around here, a 40 lets you spin up to a 32. I was actually running a 40% with my 33-inch Aztecs very successfully. And I actually ran 35s with a 40%, and that didn't work out too well. Needed more gear ratio for 35s. But like I said, it's a Honda. It doesn't have enough power to really be effective on a 35-inch tire. So if you're going to do that, just do portals and make it a tractor like I'm about to do. But yeah, so that's my opinion on the gear ratios. Hopefully this will answer some questions that I get all the time. And of course, if you need a gear reduction, I still install them pretty frequently. I keep them in stock. I'm doing Jeremy Lee's right now. He's been giving me the best deals, and I've had great reliability with the Reduction Boss reduction. So hit me up if you're in the Orlando, Florida area. On the quads, I can usually do a same-day turnaround. Just takes a couple hours. And on the side-by-sides, like the P500s, I'm doing a lot of those. That takes me a solid day. So I usually let me leave it overnight so I can have time to get everything settled and go test drive in the morning, because those are a little more labor. All right. Thanks, guys.